spoke of Wyatt joining us from Washington, D.C. Wyatt, we spoke of in the last segment, kind of going over, the speed of movement around infrastructure. We've been happy with the way that the Prime Minister has been speaking about infrastructure. He seems to be pretty, adamant on pushing that forward, as well as diplomatic engagement. He's been doing a great job at going around different countries, engaging diplomatically, really building those relationships. And then as well, I was even impressed with the United States, his sit down with, President Donald Trump. When we talk about some of the negatives, so a couple of things that I've heard around this regard, environmental backlash. And I do want to talk about this a little bit because it's a big 180 from what I thought the Liberals were, just growing up, seeing the previous Liberal Party, which is, okay, we want to support the environment. We want to invest into the environment. We want to continue to go green, be a leader in, green energy, be a leader in a green environment, green climate in the world. And now we're going into Canada needs to be an energy superpower, an infrastructure superpower, speaking of energy. That type of backlash, I mean, are we willing to just forget the climate goals a little bit and say we want to be an energy superpower because we know that that's what we need in order to become an affordable country? Or what's the discussion around there? What are you seeing?
I think there's two parts to this. I think the first part is Mark Carney recognizing that a lot of the Trudeau government's policies were simply unpopular. Again, another example of that is the carbon tax. So they ended up repealing it. And as a result, we're moving forward. So some of the climate goals, whether it be 2030, whether it be 2050, whether it be net zero, whatever the case may be, repealing some of those, not totally abandoning them, but certainly repealing some of them, that might be part of it. But I also think, again, that everything really within the first 100 days ties back to the idea of this trade policy and the back and forth between Canada and the US. And Donald Trump has been demanding really that in order to reach a deal, Canada's going to need to step it up a notch. And really one of the main leverages that Canada has is in the oil and energy sectors. Again, as I said in the last segment, Donald Trump and Danielle Smith have been talking about how they want to really try and build a lot more transfer a lot more back and forth. I also really want to mention this. This is important as well, because I think right now a lot of the backlash is going towards Mark Carney for not being able to reach a trade deal. If you talk to people like Howard Lutnick, who's the Commerce Secretary in the United States, he's come out publicly and admitted that he and Doug Ford had a very heated, basically yelling exchange over the phone, where Howard Lutnick got mad at Doug Ford because Doug Ford said that he wanted to cut off energy to the United States. Those types of things aren't helpful, whether it's coming from the US or the Canadian side. And actually, that's one thing that Mark Carney, I think, deserves a lot of praise for, is he's taken a very diplomatic approach, and he hasn't,
Can I ask you why, just out of curiosity,
to the same extent as Donald or Trump or Doug Ford?
Why do we have premiers playing prime minister as it relates to, conversations around trade?
It's a good question.
This has been happening. I mean, is this kind of the general consensus, that should not be happening? That's not a coordinated approach?
It's definitely not. And I think right now it looks really messy on the part of Canada. And Doug Ford did a similar thing over the course of the pandemic as well, where, all things, I will give a little bit of credit to him, because over the course of the pandemic, the federal government didn't do necessarily what they needed to do. So Doug Ford tried to step in. But I think right now, like you said, it makes things look really, really messy. But I think a lot of it is purely self-interest for each of the provinces. Doug Ford is trying to do what he wants to do so that it will resonate with the people of Ontario. So in the next election, he is able to kind of, perform better. And I think right now the problem is Mark Carney is taking the one-size-fits-all approach for all of the country. And then the premiers are trying to differentiate their individual approaches depending on what appeals to their electorate.
So let me ask you this. We got about a minute and a half here, and I really want to get into this around the trade deal discussion. From what I understand, I was listening to a podcast earlier this morning around how retaliatory tariffs, China and Canada were the two countries that placed retaliatory tariffs on the United States, despite the U.S. saying don't place retaliatory tariffs. And a lot of people are saying that the tariffs are basically a push to just make people make a decision faster and speed up the process versus maybe necessarily those tariffs being a lasting impact, despite us seeing a 15% tariff in an EU deal. Should Canada drop the retaliatory tariffs? Because we haven't reached a trade deal. And at what point do we need to make a decision and say, we need a deal? And this is really hurting Canadians. So we have to play ball.
At the end of the day, whether it be the tariffs that America is putting in place on Canada or vice versa, tariffs are really just, they're inflationary, they drive up consumer costs, and so that's true as well for Canada's retaliatory tariffs. Again, I go back to my conversation with Danielle Smith. When I talked to her, she said repeatedly, retaliatory tariffs are the ones causing the most harm to businesses in provinces like Alberta, and it's the same thing when you talk to people in the United States. There was a Yale study that showed that the average American family, their buying power will be reduced by about $2,400 as a result of the Trump administration's tariffs. Tariffs are bad all around for everybody. Trump uses them as a
So
leveraging
Wyatt, let
and
me ask you
negotiating
this
tactic,
question.
but I don't think there's Trump.
Just should we drop the retaliatory tariffs to play ball and engage in a conversation with the United States? Not right now.
Not right now.
Okay. All right. We'll get into it a little bit more. We've got 5 seconds left here. So stay tuned for more and kind of just discussion around the overall strategy that the Prime Minister can take leading up.